How y'all doing today? As you noticed, I'm using my real accent on this review, so you know what that means. It's time for a good old-fashioned Wild West showdown. Because in this Mad Musings, I'm hankering to take a look at Boot Hill, the third RPG to come out of TSR and the first non-fantasy game they put to paper. It went to 3 editions, 2 in the 70s and the last one coming out in 1990. Unfortunately, the game never did catch on with players, and we haven't seen a 4th edition in 30 years. So why did this one ride off into the sunset and TSR hitch their wagons to other titles? I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to mosey on up to Boot Hill. Boot Hill goes all the way back to the earliest days of RPGs. Published in 1975, just a year after D&D first saw print, it was a tiny booklet compared to today's standards, digest-sized and only 40 pages. It was first written by Gary Gygax and Brian Bloom, with 4 artists getting the credit for interior art, but only by last name. Tracy Lesh did the exterior art. The art is crude by later TSR standards, with some interesting choices like John Wesley Hardin, an actual ancestor of mine, trying to get the drop on Wild Bill Hickok with what appears to be a Colt 1911. So let's get this out of the way. First edition barely qualifies as a role-playing game, as it's quite clearly meant to be a war game with all the rules and charts. The only thing even qualifying it to be an RPG is it does have a couple of non-combat skills, and I do mean a couple. You got rules for gambling and tracking. You got 4 stats: speed, personal accuracy, bravery, and strength. The game uses percentiles for everything, so your stats go from 1 to 100. You've also got experience, which is another stat which serves more as a level system. Every fight you survive raises your experience by 1, and this increases your chance to hit. Combat is quite simple. Find all the modifiers to your accuracy and roll to hit. If you do hit, check the wound location if the results are either a reduction in strength or instant death. Ain't a complex system. If your strength hits 0, you get KO'd and you're out of the fight. Ain't no rules for recovery. This is more of a war game after all. As you can see, first edition didn't have a lot going for it. Now, skip ahead to 1979. Disco is king. Kramer is going full bore against Kramer, and Boot Hill has another go-round with second edition, also written by the original authors. This time it's a box set with counters and a map, but the rulebook is still in the same 40-page range. The stats are the same, except personal accuracy gets renamed gun accuracy. Wounds are still in the dead not dead category. As long as you've got strength left, you can still pull the trigger. Banditos ain't got time to bleed. Second edition does give rules for healing and improving your character, but a lot of it's just cut and paste from first edition. It does include some rules for some of the nastiest hombres this side of the Rio Grande, including their bounty and how many men they put in the ground. John Wesley Hardin leads the pack with 44, so yay great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy. But it is still mostly a war game than an RPG. Even the modules it receives are more scenarios and adventures, with the noticeable exception of Mad Mesa. Skip forward a full decade, and TSR is launching 2nd edition D&D and decides not to let the long-dead Boot Hill franchise go completely bust. So 3rd edition gets launched, and Steve Winter gets the writing credit this time around. He tosses out almost everything, turning it into a true RPG and moving away from its wargaming roots. Percentile system is gone, replaced with a D20 system. Skills are added, and wounds are completely revised. It's practically a different game, only recognizable to its predecessors by the setting. This edition only got a single module in the Curse of Cortez, and even that was an RPGA adventure. For all purposes, Boot Hill was a one-book wonder, and it never saw any official support after that. 3rd edition used a D20 for skill checks. You rolled the die, and you tried to get equal to or under your level in the skill. Non-combat skills started at a random level. When you got one, you rolled 2d10, and that's your level. Combat skills always start at 1, and these are calculated by the type of weapon used along with any and all modifiers, because Boot Hill loves modifiers. Again, roll a d20, and if you hit the target number or lower, that's a wound. Check location and roll a d6 to see if it was a mortal wound. Add any and all modifiers. If the modifier roll is a 6 or higher, the wound is mortal, unless you make a luck roll. You can only die from a mortal wound. Light wounds and major wounds are never mortal, regardless of how many you get. And unless you are throwing some serious lead down range, a hit to a limb is never lethal because femoral arteries don't exist in the Wild West, I reckon. The majority of the rules in 3rd edition are combat related. Boot Hill is pure action. You can try to make a roll to yank a wisdom tooth if you got the skill, but you ain't playing this game to practice your dentistry, even if you is playing Doc Holliday. It uses an initiative system where the slowest announce their actions first, and then the fastest act first. And no, you can't change your actions. It does require you to shoot first before moving. You can't fire and move at the same time. So if you want to recreate the Wyatt Earp versus Curly Bill fight in Tombstone, you're going to have to house rule that. There's a ton of modifiers and rules for quick draws. This is a very cinematic Wild West, though it does keep it realistic enough that standing in the open for a showdown is more than likely going to get both people killed. Get behind that rock or get behind that water trowel, because Kevlar's still a few decades away. Or just put a steel plate under your serape and hope they don't shoot you in the head. The rules actually include how to use horses finally. The previous editions mentioned them, but never included them in any way except for combat modifiers. You can saddle break horses, lasso mustangs, and even fight from horseback if you want. There's no rules for shooting horses, so again, you're going to need to house rule that in case somebody wants to shoot out a mount from a Comanche that's about to ride him down. The book does cut and paste the fastest guns from the West from 2nd edition, but it also gives you a list of westerns to watch in order to get in the mood for Boot Hill. This is a little strange because it has a habit of telling you about the actor and not the character in some of those entries. It'll tell you the Red Rider was one of the most popular shows of its time, but nothing about the character himself. The chart alternates between actor names and character names with no consistency. You can't have the man with no name on one line, then Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef on the next line, instead of having Tuco and Angel Eyes. First off, Clint Eastwood played Blondie in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He was Manchoing for a few dollars more. He only was the man with no name for a fistful of dollars. This is a minor gripe, but it did stick in my craw. And before you ask, the game does predate movies like Tombstone Maverick and The Unforgiven, so those aren't mentioned. There's a small history section in the game, but even TSR admits it's a very trimmed down version of actual historical events. It starts in 1848 and goes to 1912 with about 2 pages of history. There's a laundry list of Wild West personas that's still there, but again, there's no explanation on who any of these people are. After that, it gives you some scenarios and a sample town, with the shootout at the OK Corral repeated as it is in every edition. Boot Hill was an RPG by the barest of measures until 3rd edition. None of the editions got anything in the form of a source book, which was unusual for a TSR product. It was too much of a war game for the RPG players, and the fact it lacked any supernatural or science fiction element in a time where people were looking for escapism didn't help. You can get copies of 2nd and 3rd edition over on drive-thru, so if you want a physical copy of the book, ain't nothing holding you back. Next time around, I'm going to go back to the World of Darkness with Mage the Ascension, the 3rd and possibly most groundbreaking book in the series. Instead of supernatural creatures from the nightmares of our ancestors, you're a reality-warping mortal fighting for control of what people consider possible. Known for its upbeat nature compared to its 2 predecessors, a mind-blowing magic system, and starting serious debates on who exactly the bad guys were in the first place, it is widely considered one of the best RPGs of all time. But until next time, take off your hat. I'm going to play with your mind.